the country will come back. It'll go through a big recession and everything, but it'll come back, and it's coming back. So don't ever worry about America. It'll tell you, you're in the right place. The lessons are that people will continue to make the same mistakes they've made. Humans, it doesn't correlate to IQ particularly. When they get greedy, and we had this huge bubble in the most important asset the American public has, housing. So you had a huge bubble in something that you could borrow heavily against. So you could run a margin account effect on a house instead of stocks, and the conditions got very lax. And so when that bubble popped, but people came into that gradually. When they get fearful, it happens all at once. When people get scared, they all want to leave at one time. And we had them all want to leave at one time, and that'll happen again. It'll happen with a different set of circumstances, but the human animal will keep behaving pretty much the way it has in the past. So we will have periodic recessions. We'll have an occasional panic, which doesn't all recessions don't come from panics. But the good news is, if you look at the 20th century, in the 20th century, we had 2 world wars. We had the Great Depression. We had the flu epidemic. We had the Cold War. We had the atom bomb, you name it. The Dow Jones average went from 66 to 11,497. With all these terrible things happening supposedly at various times. America works. And when I bought my first stock when I was 11, that was in the spring of 1942. And that was a couple months after Pearl Harbor. And we were getting clobbered in the Pacific at Corregidor and Bataan. The Death March of Bataan. And in the European theater, the Blitz of England was on. And the Dow was at about 100. But just look at where we are now. The country really works. The trick is, it seems to me, the obligation of a society as prosperous as ours is to figure out how nobody gets left too far behind. Right. You will have periodic recessions, and you will have an occasional panic brought on by something that who knows where it comes from. And the thing to remember at that time, I wrote an op-ed piece in the New York Times in the fall of 2008, and I said, the country will come back. It'll go through a big recession and everything, but it'll come back, and it's coming back. So don't ever worry about America. It'll tell you, you're in the right place. The most important thing is to be able to define which ones you can come to an intelligent decision on and which ones are beyond your capacity to evaluate. You don't have to be right about thousands and thousands and thousands of companies. You only have to be right about a couple. I met Bill Gates on July 5th, 1991. We were out in Seattle, and Bill said, you've got to have a computer. And I said, why? And he said, you can do your income tax on it. I said, I don't have any income. Berkshire doesn't pay a dividend. He said, well, you can keep track of your portfolio. And I said, I only have one stock. I said, and he says, it's going to change everything. And I said, well, will it change whether people chew gum? And he said, well, probably not. And I said, well, will it change what kind of gum they chew? And not. And I said, well, then I'll stick to chewing gum and you stick to computers. I don't have to understand all kinds of business. There's all kinds of business I don't understand. But there's thousands of opportunities there. I did understand the Bank of America. I'm able to do that. I'm able to understand some given percentage. But Ted Williams wrote a book called The Science of Hitting. And in The Science of Hitting, he's got a diagram, shows him at the plate. And he's got the strike zone divided into 77 squares, each the size of a baseball. And he says, if I only swing at pitches in my sweet zone, which he shows there, and he has what his batting average would be, which is 400. If he had to swing at low outside pitches, but still in the strike zone, his average would be 230. He said the most important thing in hitting is waiting for the right pitch. Now, he was at a disadvantage because if the count was 0-2 or 1-2 or so on, even if that ball was down where he was only going to bat 230, he had to swing at it. In investing, there's no called strikes. People can throw Microsoft at me and you name it, any stock, General Motors, and I don't have to swing. And nobody's going to call me out on called strikes. I only get a strike called if I swing at a pitch and miss. So I can wait there and look at thousands of companies day after day, and only when I see something I understand and when I like the price at which it's selling, then if I swing, if I hit it, fine. If I miss it, it's a strike. But it's an enormously advantageous game. And it's a terrible mistake to think you have to have an opinion on everything. You only have to have an opinion on a few things. In fact, I've told students, if when they got out of school, they got a punch card with 20 punches on it, and that's all the investment decisions they got to make in their entire life, they would get very rich because they would think very hard about each one. And you don't need 20 right decisions to get very rich. 4 or 5 will probably do it over time. So I don't worry too much about the things I don't understand. If you understand some of these businesses that are coming along and can spot things if you can spot on Amazon, for example, it's a tremendous accomplishment what Jeff Bezos has done. And I tip my hat to him. He's a wonderful businessman. He's a good guy too. But could I have anticipated that he would be the success and 10 others wouldn't be? I'm not good enough to do that. But fortunately, I don't have to. I don't have to form an opinion on Amazon. And I did form an opinion on the Bank of America. And I formed an opinion on Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola's been around since 1886. There's 1.8 billion 8-ounce servings of Coca-Cola products sold every day. Now, if you take 1 penny and get 1 penny extra, that's $18 million a day. And 18 million times 365 is 7 billion, 3 less 730 billion, or $6,570 million. So annually, $6,570 million from 1 penny. You think Coca-Cola is worth a penny more than, Joe's Cola? I think so. So, and I've got about 127 years of history that would indicate it. So those are the kind of decisions I like to make. And you may have an entirely different field of expertise than I would have, and probably much more up to date in terms of the kind of businesses that we're seeing evolve. And you can get very rich if you just understand a few of them and understand their future. But fortunately, I don't have to. If we go into Heinz, I look at people pouring ketchup on, hamburgers and potatoes. I don't think it's going to change. And the nice thing about it, some products travel. Some products don't travel. Candy bars don't travel well. Soft drinks travel, and ketchup travels. I like products that travel. The best investment I ever made, I bought a book in 1949 by a fellow named Ben Graham called The Intelligent Investor. I don't remember what I paid. But aside from what I paid for my 2 marriage licenses, that was the best investment I ever made. It's very important to have the right framework. You need to have an approach to investing that's sound. And Graham's approach is simple, but some people adopt to it, which I did immediately, and most people don't. But if you have the right philosophy, you will find opportunities as you go through the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And frankly, you're most likely to find them in periods when we were having the panic. Stocks sell at silly prices from time to time. Most stocks at one time or another sell at very silly prices. And it doesn't take a high IQ to figure out that they're cheap, but it does take a temperament that's willing to step up and actually act. I tell people, if they're going in the investment business, if you got 160 IQ, sell 30 points to somebody else because you won't need it. I figured out very early, you don't have to be that smart in this business, which is fortunate, but you do have to have the right temperament. And you have to be able to ignore what other people are saying and simply look at the facts and decide, is this stock which is selling at X worth 2X? And occasionally you'll find things like that. And when you don't find them, you don't do anything. So that's my generalized stock tip, no names.
You mentioned that people will make the same mistakes in terms of the boom-bust cycle. But there have been several recent financial developments, such as the creation of derivatives, which has since exploded recently. And you once called derivatives weapons of mass destruction.
Right.
Now that derivatives are a $700 trillion industry, do you see this as setting the stage for the next financial crisis?
It's very hard to tell that, we've enacted Dodd-Frank. And if you look at what happened in September and October of 2008, there were some extraordinary things done. The Federal Reserve poured $85 billion into AIG, and if they hadn't, our world would be very different. Hank Paulson guaranteed money market funds at a time when 30 million Americans with money market funds were panicking, and when $300 billion in 3 days had gone out of the non-government money market funds, 125 of it had gone back into the government. $300 billion, that was almost equal to the deposits of Wells Fargo or Wachovia at the time, which were then two separate institutions. Both of those authorities have essentially, I don't think they can do that under Dodd-Frank. When there's a panic, The only thing that will stop it, basically, is when somebody who has the ability and the will says, I'm going to do whatever it takes. And basically, that's what Bernanke and Paulson, and finally, Congress in a kind of a reluctant way. There will be another panic. Where it comes from, who knows? But when that time comes, the question will be, are the people who have panicked, who have frozen, who have caused the economic engine to stop, will they believe and come right back and be doing something? And I'm not sure what's been enacted is a plus or a minus in that regard. Regardless, the country will come through, but it's very hard to write regulations that will keep people from acting foolishly, particularly when acting foolishly has been proven very profitable over the preceding few years. It's just the way it works. Humans, they all think they're Cinderella at the ball, and they think, as the night goes along, the music gets better and the drinks flow and everything, they all think they're going to leave at 2 minutes to 12. And of course, there's no clocks on the wall and they're still dancing. So it'll happen again. But buy when it happens. I'll be buying. There is a very, I think, structural problem as a market system gets more and more specialized. If you go back to an agrarian society like we had a couple hundred years ago with most people working on a farm, most people fit most job requirements. I mean, it was, as the world has become more and more specialized, I think we keep moving away from that. So a market system will not pay well for a significant percentage of society. They aren't needed to keep GDP itself going up and people at the top. And I think government has to address that. I sometimes toss out to students this proposition. Imagine that it's 24 hours before you're born, and you're sitting there, Johnny or Joni, we don't know yet, and you're in the womb, and a genie comes. And the genie says, John or Joni, you strike me as a remarkable potential human being, and I'm going to give you an enormous responsibility. I'm going to let you decide the world, how the world is going to work into which you're going to emerge. You can decide on the economic system, the social system, the political system. You design it. And whatever you design, that's going to be the system in which you live, your children live, grandchildren live. And you, being wise beyond your minus 24 hours of age, say, I know all about you, genies. What's the catch? And the genie says there's one catch. Just before you emerge, having designed the system, put it in cement, you're going to go over to that barrel over there that has 7 billion slips in it, one for every human being in the world, and you're going to pull out a slip. It may say male, it may say female, it may say white, it may say black, it may say infirm, it may say strong, it may say bright, it may say below average, it may say United States, it may say Bangladesh. Now, not knowing which ticket you're going to pull out, what kind of a world do you want to design? Well, you certainly want to design a world that produces lots of goods and services and keeps producing more and more. You want a lot of stuff around. It could be the world's fairest society, but if it's on a barren desert island, it isn't going to do anybody good. So you really want something that works in terms of output. But once you have something that works in terms of output, you certainly want something that eliminates fear from everybody's life. Now, that doesn't just mean a lot of cops. It means fear of old age, fear of health, all of those problems. And you certainly want a system not knowing what tickets you're going to get that takes care of the people that don't survive so well in that market system, which maximizes the amount of output, your first goal. And I think we've done a wonderful job at the first stage. We have turned out lots of stuff. We have not thought as much, although we've thought a fair amount. I mean, when Social Security came in and all of that, I mean, this country has developed in terms of thinking about how a rich family should behave. But I think we are in the stage where we need to focus more on making sure that the people who get the bad tickets do better than they are. And, we said that blacks were 3/5 or slaves were 3/5 of a person back when we started. And said, we said all men are created equal in 1776, and in 1789 we said blacks are 3/5 of a person. We not only said all men are created equal, but in the Gettysburg Address, Lincoln repeated it. It was 1920 before we passed the 19th Amendment for women. So we just treated women as a essentially different class for all those years. So I think we've gone significantly in the right direction in terms of behaving better as a society. And I think we've gone terrifically in the right direction in terms of turning out lots of stuff. But I think we have to address the question of how do you treat the people that are left behind in a system that maximizes the output of goods and services. And that can only come through government. The economy is getting better. We are in an experiment which hasn't really been tried before. I mean, Fed has $8.5 trillion balance sheet, and buying securities is usually easier than selling securities, as sometimes people find out. So we don't know how this game plays out. And just the announcement, whenever it was a few months ago, that tapering was going to occur, that had some significant market reactions, probably 100 basis points or so in the 10-year. And what will happen when if they actually try to deleverage the Fed? I mean, what has happened is the American public deleveraged and the government leveraged up through the Fed. If the Fed deleverages that in any big way, that will be a new experiment. And the Fed is the greatest hedge fund in history. The Fed is the fourth largest contributor to the United States government's revenues that there is now. That wasn't the case a few years back. And it is under no pressure, none whatsoever, to have to deleverage. So it can pick its time, and if you have somebody wise there, it can be handled. But it is something that's never quite been done on this scale. It'll be interesting to watch.